Good evening, everybody, or it's good evening in Westwood. My name is Julie Sina, and I have what is truly the honor and privilege to serve as the director of the UCLA Alumni Association. So thank you so much for spending some time with us tonight in what I know will be just an incredible conversation. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a panel. I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves in just a minute. And I've got some questions that we're going to get us started with. But please feel free to send your questions at any time to the chat room, and we'll do our best to try to get through everything. So thank you so much in advance for what we know will be an incredible experience. And one of the things I do want to acknowledge is that, we really do again look forward to being able to have our programs being in one space, whether we're traveling to where our participants are tonight or welcoming you to Westwood. So with that, let's get started. So the place I'd like to start is if we could have each of our panelists introduce yourself, when you graduated from UCLA, what you majored in, and where are you talking to us from tonight? So Bernadette, how about if we start with you?
Sure. Hi everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Bernadette Stewart, or Bernadette Castillo Stewart. I am a double Bruin, graduated in '95. I graduated with a communications major. And then I also got my MBA through Anderson and NUS, the National University of Singapore, in 2010. So, and currently I am in Singapore, and that's actually just by coincidence. What else? Oh, I currently work for the US Embassy here in Singapore. So this is my third tour with the US Embassy. So this is for the US government. So it's been a surreal experience. I got to Singapore in September of 2019.
Thank you, Bernadette. And it was great. Thank you so much for hosting one of our centennial celebrations when we celebrated. I think it was just this past year. It seems like forever ago, but it was not that long ago. Brian? Same thing to you, Brian. Last time we saw each other, we were at a centennial celebration.
Yes, we were. Hi, I'm Brian Doe. I graduated as a poli-sci major in '96, and I have been in Asia ever since. And I'm calling in from Seoul, Korea. Well, not actually Seoul, but very right north of Seoul. And I'm calling in from my single malt distillery, which is I make whiskey, and I also make craft beer too.
Mm-hmm. Which you were so generous to share with us at the Centennial Celebration, so thank you for that.
Sure.
All right, Mai?
Hi, I'm Mai. I currently am calling from Taipei, Taiwan. I graduated from UCLA in 2008 as a communication major with a minor in the Global Studies program, which was very new that year. I think we were the first class. I currently moved to Taiwan in 2008, actually, so right after I graduated, and I've been here ever since. I run and operate 2 vegan restaurants here, so if you're ever in Taipei, please stop by.
Everybody heard that, right? So this is the conversation tonight is talking about what it's like to be an expat living in Asia. So I don't want to assume that everybody knows what an expat is. So would somebody like to just quickly offer us a definition? Any of our panelists? How would you define an expat if asked? Brian?
An expat used to be someone on an expat package as a foreigner in the country that you're in, but not anymore. They've changed that since probably around 2000s. And now it's just a foreigner living in a different country. That's how I assume it is.
No, thank you, Brian. And as you suggest, I know that that's a definition that's evolved over time. So thank you. So, Mai, were you going to say something? Add something?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll come to you next, though. So where I'd like us to start is to talk about, the trajectory of the COVID experience and in the countries that you're in and where things are at now. So give us a sense of what the experience has been since, so for us it's in March, but I know for many of you in Asia it's been, or goes further back than that. So what's that trajectory been like, and where are things at now? Bernadette, would you like to start?
Sure. I think Singapore's experience, my experience in Singapore has been much like that in all of, I guess, in line with China's, because it started in January, at least it became public in January. And that's when, around Chinese New Year's, when it started making the buzz around here. Since then, Singapore has been very cautious. They took steps to mitigate the spread and did a very good job early on. Very low cases. I think with Taiwan and Hong Kong and Singapore, we were all held to this gold standard of managing this I guess new virus that was.
So what did that mean for you in terms of your daily life? I know what to mitigate that means here in LA, but what about for you in Singapore?
Well, because I work with, I guess, in the U.S. Embassy, I see a lot of people who want to travel to the United States, and there were different, I guess, regulations that we had to abide by. So it changed the way we worked a little bit. As far as personally, we just had to be aware that there was something going around that we had to wash our hands a lot. We had to try to see if someone was coughing, you just kind of kept your distance. And if you were sick, you definitely stayed home. You didn't even mess around with trying to go to work where you might normally just say, oh, I can just tough it through.
But during that whole time, you actually went to work? You didn't work from home?
Yes, we were again, the cases were very low in that first, at the onset. We were doing a really good job. The Singapore government was very vigilant about just making sure that they were going to take care of their citizens, whether they were expats or not. Felt very safe. And then as it grew, then I guess it started to take off in other areas. And then we were getting a lot of imported cases. And that's kind of where it kind of, I guess, blossomed.
So where are things at for you now?
Okay, right now we're in a period called circuit breaker. That's what they've termed it here. So if you talk to anyone in Singapore, you'll say, oh, are you under CB, a circuit breaker mode? Yes, we are in circuit breaker mode. And the circuit breaker mode went into two phases. It went into okay, everyone stay at home, don't leave, only essential places are open, and telework if you can. To then super circuit breaker mode, which became, you're really not going to leave your house. You will get fined if you're not wearing a mask or leaving or anything like that. And right now, our work, because we are considered essential, we're only about a fraction of only the necessary personnel on a day-to-day basis inside the embassy.
Got it.
But as far as there's no dining out, there's no socializing. People from their own households, from their parents and kids, if they don't live together, cannot visit each other. It's that strict.
Right. That's more similar to where we're at. Brian? Thank you, Bernadette.
Yep. Korea has been fairly successful. We have never been locked down.
When did things start up for you, Brian?
It started up, all I know is it started up the same day as the US.
So that was closer. That's a little bit later than January, a little bit later than Singapore.
Sometime around then, that was the first confirmed case. But at the very beginning, just the streets were dead, but nobody was mandatorily locked down, except for a church that started this massive wave of patients. So because of that, they stopped most religious services to go on, and then they reopened, and everything's been pretty much normal. You can go to the restaurants you want to go to. There hasn't been any real lockdowns, minus there's no concerts anymore. And then recently there was a kid who was running around rampant, going to many clubs in Korea, and he had spread the virus, so they had stopped. Now they've stopped all clubs and discos and karaoke bars and stuff like that. But everything else is pretty much back to normal, minus that. And schools actually just started yesterday for seniors, and it will start in waves depending on what grade you are in. But yeah, schools actually were locked down and they just got introduced again yesterday.
What about for you work-wise? How did it impact your work given the work that you do?
So there's two hats that I wear. One is at the distillery. We're out in like a country area, so we've never been affected. It's been full steam ahead for us. My other business is in Seoul, and at the very beginning, there's about 50 people in the office, and what they did was they allowed, they had the leadership come in, and then we had all the other employees come on a every other day basis up until about a month ago, and then everybody just coming.
So when you say they, was that government or regulated or?
No, not really. It was just on our own.
Okay. So Mai, how about you? I know you've had a very different experience.
Yeah, actually, Taiwan has been in definitely kind of this little island of itself, literally and figuratively.
Yeah, I was gonna say literally.
So we kind of started hearing inklings in about early January. So I can't remember when the first cases happened, but in around January, the government kind of first came out and was talking about this virus that was coming out of China. And everyone started going out and buying face masks. Like it's kind of part of the culture anyways. It's just normal for people who are sick, or if you are immunosuppressed, or, you're just maybe a germaphobe. Like, it was just totally normal for you to have your mask on at the MRT or in public spaces. So it wasn't abnormal, but then everyone started selling out and everyone was trying to get their hands on these masks. So very early on, the government stepped in.
What about toilet paper? Toilet paper has been the big thing.
No, that toilet paper didn't happen until much later. And actually that happened because someone started spreading a rumor that the government was using the raw materials to make the mask. So then they actually caught the person who started the rumor online. They got fined. And then we were okay. Like, the government came out and was like, there's plenty of toilet paper. We'll show you the manufacturing. Like, this is how many we're producing. So everyone was okay. So they came in and they actually took over mass production, and they stopped the public from selling it.
Now, you're referring to the government?
Yeah, the government stepped in and started taking control of sales and rationing the masks so that everyone could have enough, and the hospitals were okay, and everyone was kind of preparing. And once that kind of happened, everyone just started wearing masks, and it wasn't even a regulation yet. And then the government, we went into Chinese New Year, and that was kind of, everyone knew that was going to be kind of a hot zone with all the traveling. So they started instituting a lot of regulations in terms of travel, and all the different agencies were actually coordinating with each other. And that was kind of the key to the government containing all of this. All the information was being shared amongst all the different departments, and they were tracking people pretty much, like nationals coming in and kind of where they came from. And yeah, they stopped travel from China before Chinese New Year. And after Chinese New Year, they actually extended the vacation for schools and didn't have schools start right away, which was another key step that they did. So we actually have never gone into any kind of lockdown. The government makes announcements to us every day, and there's a news conference, and they tell how many new cases we have, and everything is still open, but with caution, basically.
Oh my, how about in your situation, given that as you shared at the beginning, that you've got 2 restaurants? How was your business impacted during this?
In the beginning, and we were doing really well in February, and then come March, when the travel really stopped and everyone started to get more cautious and scared, people were doing voluntary self-quarantine, and everyone was going out a lot less and not gathering per the government's guidelines, right? So these weren't actual like enforced rules or anything. These were just guidelines that we were supposed to follow. We saw, luckily for us, we saw about a 30 to 40% drop in business. We talked to other restaurant owners, bar owners, they saw about 70% drop in business. So F&B got hit pretty hard.
And how
And
about for your industry? You know, you have the distillery and the beer. Were you impacted by your business impacted in any way, Brian? Was your business impacted in any way, or positively or negatively?
All right. We have restaurants also. So I have 5 restaurants all across Seoul, and those restaurants were impacted, of course, most in February and March, and I think businesses picked up fairly almost back to normal, minus one of our stores, but it's getting back up to normal. For us, there are ways that we, I think the most important thing that we did was to instill confidence in consumers coming back to the restaurant, whether it was to sanitize everything or spread apart the tables that are not close enough. With that, I think it helped. And my other manufacturing business, we did have some issues because we had to have people, we had equipment that was here from Germany, and then we had to have people from Germany come and commission the project, but they obviously couldn't come during the coronavirus times. So we had to commission everything online through Zoom or Skype, which was very difficult. Then because of the global supply chain, we weren't able to get the proper equipment that we needed. A lot of stuff that comes out of China, we just couldn't get, so a lot of projects got pushed back. The launch of my business got pushed back about 2 months, probably.
Wow. Wow. But things are going better now, you said.
We've just started.
Good. Well, we'll knock on whatever we got. So first question from one of our panelists. I mean, from one of our panelists, so you're the panelist, from one of our audience members. Susan would like to know how each of your respective countries are viewing the U.S. efforts to manage the pandemic. So what's the talk about what's going on in the United States? I'm going to go to our embassy person first. Bernadette, what's the talk about the United States and Singapore and in your work?
Well, right now, our main focus is supporting the U.S. citizens that are here in Singapore. I mean, a lot of them have needs. They need to either travel, they need new passports or things like that. So in my personal experience, this pandemic has affected us in a way that I can now truly, I feel really supportive of the people that are here and all their issues that stem from trying to get back to the United States. They have family in the United States. They're trying to do business in the United States. So trying to help them. That's our main focus. As far as my friends, my family that are still in the United States, I was actually in the United States in March when it started to, when it first started. And I could see that it hadn't really taken hold yet as far as whether people were taking it seriously. Where I had come from, this was just the normal. You were always cautious. You were always washing your hands. You weren't touching anybody. You weren't hugging anybody anymore. So as far as
like what Mai was referring to too, is there's a lot of common practice there. So
right, exactly. So now I see it, and a lot of people are being affected, and I can absolutely empathize with them. And so we now have a common bond whenever I talk to my friends on our Zoom happy hours or something like that, that we talk about how it now affects us all. Before it used to just be, what's going on in Singapore? Now it's,
well, I think what Susan's getting at, if you're willing to share, is what's your sense of what is the perception of how the U.S. is dealing with it? Is what do you see on the news for you that in reference to that?
Well, personally, the numbers are staggering. But of course, that's because the population in the United States is much larger than it is in Singapore. Of course, I think that people are just generally afraid of being in, I guess, in a dangerous situation where they could be infected. And when they look at the United States and they just see the sheer numbers, it's hard not to be afraid. That said, you see a lot of good stories coming out of the United States about how people are trying to rise up above this, how they're also taking it seriously. There are a lot of leaders who are trying to manage their population or their sectors and trying to do what's right for their citizens in that area. So it's good to see that, because they are adopting a lot of the policies that other nations have that came before.
Thank you, Bernadette. Mai or Brian, any comments on what you're hearing, or what is the perception in Taiwan or in Korea about how the United States is dealing with the pandemic? Any comment on that?
I don't know how to put this politically correct, but
Oh, it's just us in the chat.
yeah, I mean, it's just I'm American citizen, and I consider California my home. So I'm actually scared for my friends back home.
Now, why do you say that, Brian?
Just because there's two things that I'm scared. Number one, scared of them. And I already know two friends whose parents have passed away because of the coronavirus. And I've had friends who's had coronavirus, and they've been shooed away from the hospital. So scared of the fact that it's been difficult for them to get testing and to get the proper medical care from that. And then the second thing that I've been just reading a lot of lately is the xenophobia and the racism that's coming up against Asian Americans, or Asians in particular, in the US. So how it's a much bigger society there. And I understand what's going on in the US. So the perspective that many Koreans, I think, see, not as me being an American citizen living in Korea with friends over there, just what you see in the local news is that the current administration just isn't doing a good job. That's just what's being portrayed. And it's a fairly, right now, kind of in terms of COVID, seems like the Wild Wild West over there. A lot of the cases that we get in Korea were imported cases, where people, mostly students, a lot of students that are coming back to Korea, and they have coronavirus. And most of those students, a lot of those students, I don't want to say most, but a lot of those students, of course, are students from the US studying in colleges over there. So it just doesn't give a great sense of confidence in what the administration is doing over there, just to the general public.
Well, Brian, thank you for sharing that, and definitely really extend, very sorry for the loss of that your friends have been experiencing. I think that's just been a huge challenge for so many. As Bernadette, as you mentioned, the numbers that we're seeing are really staggering. Flipping the question around just a bit, somebody from our audience has asked to the three of you is, as an American living internationally during the pandemic, have you encountered any animosity?
Actually, a little bit in Taiwan, not me personally, because I am Asian, so they actually are very confused by me. But there has been a little bit of a backlash against the foreign nationals here that are white, because, with all the numbers being so high in Europe and the UK and the US, there is a bit of fear that the cases coming in are going to be coming in from those countries. And actually, yes, the majority of the new cases were imported, but it was actually Taiwanese nationals traveling and then coming back home. So those were the imported cases. But, that's kind of a nuanced story to tell.
Right.
And
a little bit of reverse what Brian was just suggesting.
Yeah, so the the fear kind of takes over. And so there were restaurants here that were barring anyone that looked like a foreign national. And so there was a bit of that going on, and, you know, the communities were trying to come together and talk about it and try to figure out a solution, and, you know, talk to the restaurant owners and the restaurants about maybe why this practice isn't great.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And somebody else is asking, Inez is asking, what has been your biggest challenge during this time? I think a couple of you have mentioned some of those, but anything else that comes to mind in terms of what your biggest challenge has been, either personally or professionally during this time?
Well, I guess what's been hardest is not being able to be as social as we're used to. My husband and I are very active. We like to dine out. We like to meet friends. We like to do that. We don't have kids, so it's actually been really interesting just being in the house alone with him. We've learned that we actually like each other, which is actually a good thing.
Yeah.
But as far as wanting to see friends and being new to the country, I only arrived in September. Just trying to explore, it's really difficult to do that when everything is a little bit kind of locked down. We're starting to ease those measures coming in June.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's a slow process. The government is very cautious about getting a second wave or doing anything that might jeopardize all the work that we've done so far to date.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as our challenges, I think that must be it. Just being kind of cut off because everyone is being incredibly cautious about the elder people here in Singapore. I think because the population here is very diverse, I think maybe 40%, maybe that's high, but 40% are expats anyway, that it's hard to do any of that discrimination that other countries might feel, because everyone just kind of looks different anyway. So I've never personally experienced that, to go back to that other question, but I've felt really safe while I've been here. I know that
Mm-hmm.
that may not be the case for a lot of Asians in maybe in America, where they might be discriminating against Asians, but I am Asian, so they're confused by me as well. They don't know if I'm a Singaporean or American until I start talking. But it's been a good experience so far, despite its challenges.
I have another question. Thank you, Bernadette. Charlie wants to know, what opportunities do you see with the new normal, whether it be personal or business? So I think it's either the new normal or when we get to the other side of this. What do you see? Any thoughts on new opportunities?
Well, for me, being a social entrepreneur, it's kind of exciting in a way, because I think this kind of made everyone pause and reevaluate our whole system and how it's broken, pretty much. How we value what we call, quote unquote, call essential workers, and kind of the whole structure of business in general.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is forcing people to look at what caused COVID, like what exactly. I mean, I know there's a lot of theories, but I think I don't want to get into that, but
that'll be our next panel.
Yeah, I know. So it's forcing people to think about what we're doing to the planet and how that's affecting us. And, you know, it's not just this global pandemic that's happening. There's actually 2 other epidemics happening in the animal kingdom. So, like, you know, with swine flu, and there's a bird flu going around. They haven't made the jump yet to humans, but that's causing like mass chaos among food production, supply chains. Yeah, so I'm excited to see what's about to happen, and there are a lot of opportunities if you're thinking about it in the plant-based space. That's my space. That's why I know a lot about it. But a lot of people are making the connection now between what they eat and climate change. So that's one opportunity you can think about. I'm always encouraging people to look into that space.
Thank you. Did a good job of that just now. Any other new opportunities when we get to the other side of this, and anybody wants to bring up?
I think In the business side also, something that is going to be interesting is because a lot of people are starting to see globalism becoming much more difficult. There's a lot more domestic consumption going around, especially in Korea right now. Because people can't travel outside, there's a lot more traffic. You don't recognize how many people actually travel outside until you see it. And then like LA, geez, 405, watch when everybody comes back. It's gonna be insane because people can't travel out. I mean, I can't imagine what the 405 or the 10 are gonna look like. But anyways, just
Well, I think you all would enjoy seeing what they look like now. It's pretty incredible.
now it's probably very, very good. But it's domestic consumption, like people are going places. I think the US is a little bit better off because if I was in the States, I'd think, oh, I'm going to Colorado or I'm going to Oregon, or you can go to those places. But smaller countries where they have a lot of people that travel outside, a lot of those people are starting to travel to different regions that they haven't explored. So there's actually a boom in the regional areas outside of the major cities because a bunch of people on the weekends are going, hey, let's go to this place outside of Seoul and travel and put up Instagram. So those places are actually, they were right there, they were always there, but people just weren't going there. So that's becoming a huge opportunity for domestic consumption. And other things like leisure activities, because people are going to have to get out when they do get out, is I love to ride bikes, and you can't ride anymore because there are so many people on the bike paths now on the weekends. You have to get out really early to beat the crowds. I've never ever seen it this packed ever. So leisure activities, and I'm sure that's going to be with almost every other leisure activity in the States when things start to get back to normal and traveling out is just getting on a plane. I got on a plane because I had to travel to an island called Jeju Island in the southern parts of Korea, and I had on a face mask, and there's an extra protection that you can buy to put on a face mask, but I didn't feel safe in the plane. I would not get on a plane.
Was the plane full, Brian? Was it full?
No. And there was a kid maybe 5 seats ahead of me that was coughing, and you don't know what's happening then, so you're just, I'm not going to take the plane for a while. Yeah. Even though I love to travel, I think one of the biggest impacts for me is I haven't been able to travel anywhere. But going back to what other opportunities are, I think domestic consumption side is going to be a lot more opportunities.
Well, and a couple of you brought this up, is have you seen any shift in just the way that folks are thinking about partnerships with the United States in terms of the economy or in terms of business? Has that been on the radar or talked about?
On my side, I've seen kind of my supply chain get really messed up. So I know I talked to some of my importers, and they have actually decided to stop relying heavily on goods coming from the US currently. And so they're trying to find different suppliers, either locally, which is good, or in other parts of the region. So they're looking a little bit more towards Asia rather than relying so heavily on either, like, let's say, wheat coming from the US. So I've seen, talking with suppliers and importers, I've already seen that happen. Like, we've already had 3 of our products shelved, basically. And the importers said, we're not bringing those in anymore. Yeah.
Well, I want to get to, thank you. We've got a couple of other questions that have come in. Let's see. And I think, Bernadette, you might have mentioned this. One question is, did any of you consider coming back to the United States when the US was recommending that US citizens abroad return? I know, Bernadette, you had traveled.
Well, travel was, I guess, was a little bit precarious as far as traveling from Asia to the United States. I know that when I told people that I was coming from Singapore, they looked at me like I had the plague. A lot of the people the reasons I was going to the United States, didn't want to see me because they were afraid. And understandably so, because they didn't understand what was going on. At that time, Singapore was at its very lowest as far as cases goes. So I couldn't understand why they were looking at me like I was sitting there incubating this virus and trying to perpetuate it on them. That said, we encouraged everybody to travel back to the United States because we didn't know what was going to happen with travel in general, if we were going to be locked out. As far as my situation goes, I was trying to get back to Singapore as fast as I could because I thought I would be locked out with being with my husband and being with, away from my job and my home, which was now in Singapore. I can imagine that a lot of people were kind of torn because before you could so freely go back and forth, there were flights so available, and now everything's been whittled down. I think by right now we have about between 30 and 40 flights going to the United States per week, which is maybe 6% out of the 100% of what it's supposed to be. So it's been very difficult, and people are making those choices on having to decide, if I get stuck in one place, which place is that going to be? Yeah. And I think that people had to choose that in the long term, if they needed to be with family that are in the United States, older parents or children who needed, assistance as far as being cared for because this pandemic was straining the normal household routine. I think a lot of there are people that have gone back, even temporarily during this time to sort those matters out, and it's been a reality check on what's important as far and what the priorities are.
Bernadette, I think that's true. I think no matter where we're living, right, in terms of
right, exactly.
Event for us. So Brian, I saw you shake your head no that you didn't consider coming back.
Yeah, and at the very beginning in January, February, I wouldn't go because we had so many cases. I just didn't want to deal with the stigmatism. And then I actually had tickets to go back to LA in May, and my family would definitely not allow me to get on a plane to go to the U.S. It's just because of the testing side, and we don't know who has it or who doesn't have it. It's like Russian roulette.
Got it. Mai, how about you? Did you think about returning?
No. So one of the biggest scares and we learned was travel was kind of where it was being transferred a lot, and the airports were kind of a really dangerous area to go into, and the planes and those situations. So even though we were a little scared in the beginning, Taiwan handled it so well. We knew we were going to be really safe here. So we kind of were just like, okay, we're just going to, wait it out and deal with it in Taiwan, because we did realize that the travel part was going to be the most dangerous part. Getting to an airport and on a plane, there's just so many people from so many different places. There's just no way to keep that area sanitized and clean and 100% safe.
You're getting some nods from your panelists on all of these things. We got some other good. I'm going to keep moving on. We've got great questions coming in from our folks out in the chat room. So thank you so much for that. So here's another one, and I think you started talking about this a little bit earlier, Mai. There have been many discussions surrounding environmental shifts since the world has slowed down due to COVID-19. Have any massive environmental shifts occurred in the countries that you're in?
Not specifically in Taiwan, like rivers haven't been running any different, or, the air hasn't been any, let's say cleaner or bluer, but there was definitely a lot less people out and traveling in terms of transportation. So there were a lot less cars on the road. And we don't actually know what kind of effect it's had on Taiwan because they haven't run any numbers or done any studies on it recently. Because, I think everyone's still really focused on, containment and trying to get a handle on this.
Environmental shifts in Singapore or Korea that you're aware of?
I think it's pretty much the same. Traffic and amount of cars, amount of people commuting is far less than during the normal times or what used to be the normal times. I do know that where I used to be in the Philippines, that's where they see a significant dramatic shift because where they have, I can't even tell you how many cars on the road. Now there's barely any, and you can see the sky, which is great. So I have my family, my immediate, my parents live there, and so they tell me that it's just so different. Although it's kind of anecdotal because they can't leave the house. But
well, Brian mentioned the 405 and the 10 before. One of the things I think you'd appreciate in LA right now is we're celebrating the cleanest air we've had in a long time. So. But Brian, what about Korea? Any environmental shift impact there?
Korea, there's usually in the springtime to the summertime, early summer, there's a lot of air pollutants. The AQI, I don't know what it is. It's usually really dangerous. Maybe last year was really bad, so we remember it very well. But this year we haven't had, like last year, for example, I probably had like in the springtime, maybe about 20 alerts, and then everybody would have to go and put on masks when they go outside, or you just wouldn't go exercise outside. This year, I think we've had it once, and that's because a lot of people are saying a lot of the pollutants come from China down because that's where the wind stream is, and it comes down past Korea, especially towards Seoul, and we haven't had that. They haven't had that much industrial production over the winter time, so we haven't had that. That's what people are saying, 1 + 1 = 2. I don't really know, but the skies have been much bluer, and it's been noticeably different from last year in terms of much cleaner air quality.
Thank you all for sharing that. Jerry, I believe from the Bay Area, is asking, has the government leadership in each of your countries been acknowledged as positive and productive in large part? That's part one. And then what about local perception of leadership in neighboring countries? So leadership in your country and leadership in surrounding countries. And for those of you that are tuning in, one of the things I did explain to our panelists ahead of time is, even though we're asking them these questions, we know that they're not speaking on behalf of their whole country, but they're giving us their perceptions and their observations. So with that, anybody want to take a start at that?
As far as the Singaporean government goes, they have been incredibly transparent about what they're doing, what their plans are every step of the way. In the beginning, when it was when there were only a few cases, they were guiding their citizens, expats, Singaporeans, long-term business holders, all of those, everybody, on what they thought would help mitigate this crisis. As things escalated when our numbers grew as far as in the migrant dormitories, which is primarily where the bulk of the numbers are, in the community at large, there's only like in the single digits. So if you look at Singapore's numbers, it's a little skewed because it's contained in a different area, a lot of the cases. But as far as their transparency goes, they have a WhatsApp, their daily reports, there are apps that you can use. There's a lot of tracking and tracing, which can be a little bit Big Brother-like, I guess, but at the same time, you could see that they're really trying to keep their citizens safe. And I think that comes across well when you hear leaders talking about their plans. and it seems very fluid where they're constantly talking like, now we already know what's going to happen on June 2 when the circuit breaker lifts, and we're going into several phases, and they're really telling us, look, I know this is very hard for you, and I know that it's going to be long and slow, and it's going to be slow, but they're trying to prepare us. So I appreciate that, because and they've done a lot to I guess help the community as far as rebuilding and surviving this, because a lot of course the economy is taking a hit. But they are being supportive. As far as the other governments go, I really think that Singapore focuses on themselves to make sure that they're the #1 priority. They don't want to talk about other people. They do notice that people who have lifted their measures too soon have experienced second waves or rises in cases. So that's what they want to be aware of or try to mitigate.
In the interest of time, I'm going to go on to the next question, but seriously, if any of you all want to jump in while I'm moving on, just stop me and jump, okay? So here's the next question from actually one of our alumni board directors. So thank you, Todd, for tuning in. His question is, were there actions made by the regional, local government that you think helped or hurt the spread of the virus? So what do you think your governments did that helped or hurt the spread of the virus? Anybody want to jump in on that one?
I mean, I think Taiwan did a lot of things right for containment of the virus. And one of the first things they did was they started coordinating again with all the bureaus. So all their information, all the data was being kind of streamlined into one space. And that's due to our digital minister. She's amazing. And all the information sharing meant that they could see and kind of predict where hotspots were going to be. And then they started rolling out, you know, the tracking apps and letting everyone know, and then the daily press conferences. One of the other things is Taiwan's vice president is an epidemiologist by trade. So he could also give a lot of expert advice about, you know, how we can contain this and what we should be doing. And guidelines were always being put out to the public, and everything, like Bernadette was saying, has been very transparent. So the trust with the government has been extremely high, and compliance among the general public has been extremely high. So as a restaurant owner, there was no mandate to temperature check and alcohol spray every customer coming in, but every restaurant started doing it. And that was, you know, a win-win for both sides. We built trust with the consumers that we were, you know, keeping the space safe. But for our side as well, we were making sure everyone coming in also wasn't carrying the virus. So yeah, so far no missteps with the handling. Actually, there was one misstep, and it had to do with a Navy ship. But you know, they contained it and handled the situation very quickly. But we'll see how the next phase goes, which is helping, you know, the economy recover, and we'll see what the government does with that.
Brian, any thoughts in terms of how the Korean government has handled this, either locally or nationally? Done well, hurt?
I'm not a huge fan of the current government right now, but I do have to say that they did a good job. The testing and the contact tracing has been done very well, almost too authoritarian. There's no way this could happen in the U.S. Just people with privacy issues would just go berserk.
You know, and Brian, you actually have jumped right into the next question, so I'm going to throw it at you. Phyllis wants to know, did you experience any privacy concerns with the tracing?
No, I didn't. Because I'm a U.S. citizen, and that's always one of my first go-to amendments. It's always in the back of my mind, but I really didn't, because you saw it as the greater good for the society that you're living in. So it is something that you're going to have to sacrifice on in the contact tracing. So you kind of have to be a little bit more careful during that time for example, there have been people that yeah, their affairs have gotten public because, oh, you were at this hotel at this time for what reason? So yes, if you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing, then it is kind of difficult, but mostly I would say it's for the greater good of the society. So pretty much everybody abided by it.
Thank you. Here's another question that came in. Before I move off the privacy, anybody have anything to add on the privacy issues?
No, I think it's a very cultural, I guess, sensitivity. In Singapore, they have this slogan, Singapore United. And so everyone feels that they need to do their part. And the government is always encouraging, everyone needs to do their part. So yes, there's this privacy thing, and I balance that with my, my culture. I grew up in the United States, and I'm an American citizen. So, but I understand the reason behind it, and I can do what I can. I don't prescribe to any of the tracking apps, but I sign in and I sign out of wherever I go. So, I am doing my part.
And you kind of also did a nice tip off to the next question, which is from Carlos, who asks, do you see any divisiveness in your countries, or is there unwavering unity? So that's an interesting question, Carlos.
Just really quick, Singapore, in my perception of what I see so far, it's incredibly united. The citizens all want the greater good. It can be a bit of an issue when someone walks out without their mask and someone's taking pictures of them because they want to report them. I can understand that they're just trying to keep everybody safe, but at the same time, it's like, I think he just went to go to the mailbox. But at the same time, there is a lot of unity here, and I think that's what keeps people, their spirits up, and they know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it keeps them compliant because they know that it's helping everybody else, especially the older generations.
Another question came through, and it's certainly been a topic for alumni here as well, is what about self-care? What are you all doing to maybe take some extra care of yourself during this time? Anybody want to comment on that?
A lot of magnesium salt baths, if anyone's into that, that does help a lot. Other than that, the anxiety I personally feel is anxiety for family back in the US. And I know we're super lucky here in Taiwan. We get to go about our normal lives. We have gatherings. We get to still socialize. And, my restaurants are still open. People are still dining out. But there is an underlying anxiety for kind of the whole world and what is going to happen when we all come out of this, right? So what is the world?
And Mai, I think you're hitting on something. The anxiety, I think, is something that we've been talking about a lot in terms of how do we deal with that, particularly when people are much more isolated than what they have been. So I appreciate what you're saying about the ability to move around.
Yeah, and so a few things that I know friends in the US have said that worked for them is, having these Zoom gatherings, making an effort to reach out to your friends and have like a daily conversation and have conversations with your family. And that's, I think, the best way you can look after yourselves. As humans, we're just very social beings. And so having those conversations, especially having the video on, is really helpful. So I think just being mindful of that and make sure you have that conversation every day.
Mm-hmm. Anything to add to that, Bernadette or Brian?
Unlike Korea and Taiwan, we have more the shelter-in-place feeling than that is in the United States. So as far as keeping our anxiety levels down, we try to exercise. We kind of make makeshift gyms in the other room. We are allowed to ride our bikes. So all of a sudden now I'm taking my bike out and I'm riding around just so that I can be outside without a mask.
According to Brian, every single person in Korea is doing that too.
Yeah, so that's kind of it. And I just think that just keeping in touch with other people, again, things that you wouldn't normally, you take for granted. You take your, the relationships that you have for granted, you're not building them as much. But now it's like, okay, I'm going to take the time to do a call. I'm going to talk to these people. That helps a lot.
Believe it or not, I have one last question for each of you. We've reached, I told you this hour was going to go by fast. So, what kind of advice would you give to somebody who's thinking about travel once we can travel again? What kind of advice would you give to somebody who's going to travel to Taiwan, Korea, or Singapore? What advice would you have for folks about to enter your country?
Well, I mean, if it's anytime soon, be prepared to do the 14-day quarantine. That is rough, but you guys have been doing it for a while, so you should be pros at it. But I think the biggest thing for me coming to Taiwan was there is, for me, I don't actually know Mandarin yet. I've been here for 11 years, so you can all judge me, but that kind of shows you how friendly and English speaking friendly this country is. I would learn a little bit of Mandarin. It will help you a lot if you ever do want to come visit. Otherwise, just know Taiwan is a super friendly country. Like everything, you don't have to worry about being ripped off or anything. Like when you see prices, that's what you're going to pay, and they are extremely helpful. So don't be put off or think that it's a scam. That's how Taiwan is.
I've had the opportunity to travel to Taiwan twice, both for meetings with alumni, and a beautiful, beautiful country. So I look forward to visiting you in your restaurant the next time.
I look forward to seeing you.
Advice for coming into Korea, Brian?
When everything is open again, I'm assuming the airports may get back to something of normal. I've heard it's going to take a long, long time now to get through airports for foreigners. So that's probably one thing. Other things is just be super open, and Korea is a very high-tech based country in itself. So you don't really need much except your phone to get around these days.
True.
So I'm looking forward to traveling and meeting good friends again. I think the one good thing about this is I've had a lot of Zoom reunions with old friends.
Hopefully a few Bruins in there too, Brian. So Bernadette, you've only got about a minute. So 1 minute of advice for coming to Singapore.
Singapore is an incredibly safe and friendly and accommodating place. It's very high tech as well. And very clean. You won't feel out of place because there's a lot of expats here. There's a lot of mixed cultures, so you can't tell who's who. As far as travel advice, the government is they want to keep their citizens safe. So if there are rules in place, I would recommend not breaking them and following them. That's the number one thing.
Well, thank you, Bernadette in Singapore. Thank you, Brian in Korea. Thank you, Mai in Taiwan. And Brian and Mai, if it's all right with you, no pressure as I ask you in front of everybody. When we send out our thank you notes, we'd love to include your restaurant information and your business information as well, Brian, to our Bruins are aware and support Bruin businesses. So thank you, everybody, for being so transparent, being so honest, being so candid with this conversation. Could have spent a lot more time. I look forward to our next visit. And to those of you who have spent this last hour with us, thank you so much. Thank you for continuing to build and uplift our Bruin community. And stay safe, stay healthy, and always be Bruin strong. Thank you so much. Good night.
Good Bruins.